From First Law to Malazan and the Stormlight Archive, there is so much fantasy out right now, and as a relatively new reader, that can be pretty overwhelming. So here, I've just compiled a list of my top 10 fantasy reads that I want to get to at some point or another. That can be either in the coming weeks, in the coming months, or even in the coming years. These are just like my bucket list series that I really want to get to at some point in my life. So first off, we have the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This one is immensely popular, especially here on BookTube. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, that series is a little bit intimidating. The books are like huge. I think the first one or the second one is like 1100 pages. And I've had some experience reading a bigger series. I've read the Song of Ice and Fire series, so I have some experience with that. But for some reason, it just seems like a really tall task to get into those books. Those are New York noises for you. But like I was saying, it just seems for some reason like a really intimidating task to get into these books, especially because I know like the level of world building and the level of like depth that Brandon Sanderson goes into his series. So honestly, I have been kind of shying away from that one for a little bit now, but I do expect to be getting into that sooner rather than later. Especially with the pace at which Sanderson writes, I know that this series is gonna like go farther and farther along sooner rather than later. So I want to get a head start on that and not be left behind while the hype is still strong. Alright, the next one is one that I've talked about a little bit before, and that is the Kingkiller Chronicles. I actually bought The Name of the Wind already, so that one I'm probably going to read in the next month or so. Like I've said before, what really attracted me to it initially was the title, The Name of the Wind. That title just seems so like ominous and like it's inviting me to learn more about it. And then the name of the series, The Kingkiller Chronicles, is also pretty enticing. So just based off of those two, it seems like a really interesting read. I think I've heard somewhere that like the main character is older now and he's telling his story like as an older self. He's telling a story about his past. So that seems like a really cool concept to me. And there's a really cool fan base surrounding this trilogy. Well, soon to be trilogy because the last one hasn't been released for 10 years, but I am really excited to get into it, and there are some controversial opinions, so I'm really looking forward to see how I feel about it. The third series is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I know, another Brandon Sanderson. I'm pretty sure this is the last one, and to be totally honest, I'll probably get into Mistborn a lot earlier than I get into Stormlight Archive, just because it is a trilogy and it is less intimidating than those big chunky books. And I've heard that Mistborn is a pretty good entry point into Sanderson's work. So I'm looking forward to dipping my toe into Sanderson's writing and see if I mesh well with it to get a better idea if I will like the Stormlight Archive before I, make that huge commitment. And then I've heard that Mistborn is kind of like a heist story that churns a couple of tropes on its head. And I really like the heist trope. I recently read The Lies of Locke Lamora, which is basically one big heist, and that book is one of my all-time favorites now. So I'm really looking forward to reading Mistborn and seeing how that compares. Alright, the fourth series in this list will not come as a surprise to any of you as long as you take a look at my top shelf of the bookshelf right there. And if you've been in this channel for anything more than like a video or two, because I talk about Stephen King constantly. Stephen King is my favorite author, so at some point I really want to read the Dark Tower series. As I'm sure a lot of you guys know, Stephen King's books are all connected in some way or another. There's a lot of like Easter eggs in a lot of his books, and then this series I think is what really ties it all together and brings elements from each different story and brings it into like one cohesive universe. And I'm so excited for that because I'm diving more and more deeply into Stephen King's works, and I've loved most of them so far. So I'm really excited to see how they all connect and what he can do with like a fantasy genre. But I do want to read a lot more of Stephen King's other works first, just so I can understand those connections and understand the Easter eggs in the Dark Tower series a little bit better, because I have heard that it is better to read the Dark Tower once you are pretty well read in Stephen King, just because you get to understand a lot more. And I really want to get as much out of it as I can. Alright, next is Discworld. This is a series that has only recently come on my list, but I am so excited for it. It is like 40 something books long, so it's like a monumental task, but I'm looking forward to taking it on little by little, especially since the series is broken up to like a bunch of mini storylines. So I think I'll just approach it that way instead. But yeah, this month I read Small Gods by Terry Pratchett, which is part of the Discworld universe. And I absolutely love that book. It was amazing. I have a review for it out and I just absolutely rave about it. One of my favorite books, to be honest. So I'm really excited to dive into more Discworld and see what else Terry Pratchett can bring. All right, and then we got The Poppy War. This is one that really blew up over the past year or year and a half. And I've heard so much about it all over BookTube, and it just seems like right up my alley. I heard it's really like grim dark. I'm not sure if that's the right way to describe it, but it's more of like a dark series and it's more grounded, and you explore a lot of like the effects of war and what happens during war and after war. And it is very different from a lot of fantasy in that it's not like your typical Victorian era, you know, like swords and shields. This one is more Asian inspired, and so I'm really looking forward to that, reading something that's really bright and fresh and new. And I have heard just great things about this series. I have heard that there are, you know, as with any series, any book, or anything that anybody writes, there are a few setbacks, but overall I've heard just amazing things about this and I can't wait to get into it. All right, the 7th series is probably the one that I'm most intimidated by on this list and will probably take me the longest to get to, and that is Malazan, Book of the Fallen. This series, I've just heard, is so hard to get into because of Steven Erikson's writing style and just the complexity of the world and how many different things are going on, and that you really need to take your time with this book. So honestly, not just for the fact that I'm intimidated by it right now, but also that I want to develop more as a reader and be able to recognize and pick up themes and things like that a lot better. So I want to take my time and really get into Malazan once I have had the experience reading that I think like necessary to get into a series of that scope, because that series is so rich and it has like so much to it that I really want to make sure I get the most out of it that I can. So I want to take my time. I'm not rushing into that one at all. I'll probably read it next year or maybe even the year after that. I'm not too sure, but I'm in no rush to get into this. I just know that at some point I want to have read Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Okay, and then we have The Witcher. This series, honestly, I watched the first season of the Netflix series and I wasn't too impressed by it. I'm not sure. I just didn't understand the different like timelines and the different plot lines connecting together. I couldn't really get into it. I'm not sure why. But I have heard great things about the book series, and that like the character development is some of the best ever done, and that just the stories are some of the most compelling. So I'm really excited to get into this, and then maybe even rewatching the Netflix series after to see if I get more out of it and see if I like it a little bit more. All right, we're in the home stretch here. The second to last series is First Law. This is a series that I have actually bought the first book of. I have it right there, the blade itself. And I'm really excited to get into it because I have heard so many great things about Joe Abercrombie's writing. Particularly, I've heard that his character work is just like unmatched in the fantasy genre, or just period. And if you know me, I say this in most of my videos, I love great characters. So I'm really excited to get into this series. The covers of all the books look really cool too, so that's really compelling. And then just apart from the original trilogy, there are a lot of standalone books that are really exciting to get into as well. Because once you read the initial trilogy, you have that full story. There's like other books to add to that story, which is pretty cool to me. So I'm pretty excited to get into that. And I have really high hopes for Joe Abercrombie as one of my favorite authors, because of his great writing and his great character work. So I'm really excited to get into his work. And then the last series that I have on here is the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. This is one that I've heard really great things about. Well, obviously I've heard great things about all this series, that's why I want to get into them. But this one in particular, I've heard that is so amazing, and that the main character, Fitz, I think his name is, that he goes through so much. And I've seen some like reviews of the first book where people leave comments and they're like, Fitz just needs a hug, like Fitz is going through it, man. And honestly, first, that's just hilarious, but that seems really interesting to read. Like someone who goes through so much but still pulls through. It seems like such a great read, and I've heard nothing but great things about Robin Hobb and her writing. So I can't wait to get into this series and share my thoughts with you guys. All right, and those are the 10 fantasy series that I want to read, period. There's no time frame for it. It's not like within the coming months or years or anything. These are just books that I want to have read at some point in my life, more like a bucket list. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Thank you for sticking around to the end. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. It really does help out a lot. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks, guys.